Welcome to another episode of From the Luthier's Workbench. Today I'm going to be covering part 7 of my oak butcher block kitchen tabletop guitar build. And at this stage I have the body and the neck done. So what I have to do now is I have to make a decision about how I want to proceed. And what I need to decide is, should I install the neck now, then do all my fret work? Or should I do all the fret work now and then install the neck? Well, if I do the fret work now before installing the neck, the advantage is I have easy access to the upper frets as I'm doing the fret work. If I install the neck first and then do the fret work, I have to be really careful working around the body. That's really the only disadvantage with doing that. However, I also want to do a little bit more finish work on this guitar body. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to apply a wipe-on polyurethane. So it makes sense to do that now before installing the neck. Then once it's dry, I can install the neck and then I could do the fret work. Or I could do the fret work and then install the neck. But what I think I'm going to go ahead and do is once the polyurethane is dried, I'm going to install the neck, let that completely dry, then I'm going to do the fret work. And the reason why I'm going to do it that way is because experience has taught me, if I do the fret work now, which I could do easily, and then install the neck and proceed with finishing up the guitar by doing all the final installation of the bridge and the pickups and pots and all that stuff, I'm probably going to have to do some spot fret work retouching as I'm doing the final setup. So that's just an extra step and it takes extra time. It actually would make more sense to glue the neck in, and then after I've installed the bridge and the pickups and everything, I can then do all my fret leveling, dressing and polishing all at once as I'm about to do the setup, and then I don't have to do extra work. So that's how I'm going to proceed with this build. So let's jump in and get started. The plan is really pretty simple. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be wet sanding polyurethane into this guitar body for just a slightly added level of protection. Not really for protection against scratches and dings and that sort of thing, but more against moisture, whether it's airborne moisture, palm sweat, alcohol thrown at you from an enthusiastic fan, that sort of thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet sand it in, starting out with a P500 grit wet dry sandpaper. Then I'll jump to a P800 and I'll finish with a P1000. Now, the product that I'm actually using that I'll be wet sanding into the surface, it's kind of my own mix because I find that most of your off-the-shelf polyurethanes don't have quite the right consistency to wet sand in effectively. So I've come up with this mix that works pretty well. And what I'm using is equal parts of Watco wipe-on poly, boil linseed oil, and mineral spirits, again in equal parts. And I'll mix that all up and I'll start to wet sand it into the top, the back, and the sides. Now when you're sanding, you want to pretty much follow the grain as you normally would when you're sanding wood. And just work in one section at a time. What you're actually doing is you're working up a little bit of sanding dust and mixing it in with this polyurethane, boiled linseed oil, mineral spirits mixture. And that's going to fill in some of the surface irregularities like the pores and the grain. And as I work through the grits, it will get progressively smoother and smoother. Now you don't want to linger too long because it will start to tack up on you. So you want to kind of move fairly quickly over the surface. And once I've finished with the 500, I will immediately progress into the 800. I won't let it sit around for any length of time because I don't want this stuff to start getting too sticky. After I finish sanding, I'll hang up the body for probably several days, maybe even a week or two, to let it thoroughly dry and cure. Then I'll be ready to proceed with the next steps. Of course, I can't forget the control cavity cover. I always seem to do that. In this case, I treated it exactly the same way, but I added some dark stain to my sanding mix just to give it some contrast. Before installing the neck, I took a small micro diamond file and used it to round over the edges on the fretboard to give it that comfortable played-in feel that so many of the high-maintenance guitar players appreciate. Of course, as you might expect, rounding over the edges of the fretboard takes off some of the finish, so I had to wipe on a little bit of extra BLO, and then I'll hang it up and let it dry. Once my homemade mix of boiled linseed oil, mineral spirits, and polyurethane had dried for a couple of days, I went back and proceeded to wet sand with 1500 grit sandpaper and just plain old mineral spirits by itself. And what this will do is it's going to smooth out that surface and make it feel silky soft. Of course, I can't forget the control cavity cover. Okay guys, well, I think I'm gonna have to call it a day for this episode because what I need to do now is I'm gonna let this sit for probably a week or two. As it stands right now, it's pretty close to being done as far as the finish is concerned. And usually what I like to do is before proceeding on is I'll give it the sniff test. And what that means is if I can still smell the finish, it's not fully cured yet. And I can still smell the finish on this. So I'll let it sit, like I said, for a week or two until it stops emitting that odor. Then I can proceed with installing the neck into the body and then move forward with the final assembly. So that's one of the reasons why I'm not a huge fan of the oil finishes. Yeah, they're incredibly easy to do and they look great, but they're really stinky and they take a long time to fully dry and cure. So there are alternative methods and I've kind of talked about those in the past. So for now though, until the next episode, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.